When you picture a modern America, what do you see? Usually, what comes to mind are one or more of the following: super bright lights, a really noisy atmosphere, a land of opportunity, and or unabashed rudeness. When it came to American artists, they tried to capture these virtues that so encapsulated America's image as a whole, creating a view of America unique from her contemporaries. However, unlike most artists, Edward Hopper's goal was not to capture America's lively nature. Instead, his work evokes the complete opposite: a quiet, contemplating, somber loneliness, which was a state of mind that attacked many Americans during his time and a feeling totally and utterly underrepresented in the majority of American art. But before we get into Nighthawks, let's talk about the artist a little bit. Edward Hopper led a relatively humble life. Born in Nyack, New York in 1882 to two Dutch parents, Hopper took an interest in art at the early age of 5. Inheriting his father's intellect and mother's artistic background, he readily produced charcoal sketches and later moved to oil and paints. His early works would be inspired by the naval scene, such as his The Catboat and Deck of a Beam Traveler, Gluecaster. He came to study at the New York School of Art and Design, modeling his work after the likes of Edouard Manet and Edgar Degas. During his period of art schooling, he sketched and painted live models, much to his shock, having led a mostly conservative upbringing. He also spent a few years in Paris, where he drew architectural scenes with a darker, grim palette, although he did briefly switch to a more impressionist style with a much lighter palette, painting scenes of cafes and streets. Here, he found his love for realist art, citing French artist Charles Morion. Later in his 30s, Hopper would enter a period of struggle, lacking a source of inspiration and a means to develop a style. To support himself, he returned to illustration, a practice he despised, and went, quite literally, door to door looking for work. Eventually, Hopper sold his first painting, Sailing, in 1911, but would not be able to make any further financial gains for a long while. Frustrated with oil painting, Edward took up etching and produced as many as 70 works, mostly consisting of urban scenery. In the 1920s, many of his works began to receive recognition, and some themes present in his later works also began their roots at this time, such as Night on the L Train, Evening Wind, and most importantly, Apartment Houses, which began his major theme of a viewer looking through a window into the scene. In 1924, he married Josephine Division, who would become his pseudo-manager for his career, his primary model, and his companion for life. She would assist him in selling some of his previous works, finally stabilizing his finances so he could continue painting in relative leisure, even managing to fare well during the Great Depression, an event in which he would draw quite a bit of inspiration from. He suffered several illnesses in the late 1940s and would not paint much until the 1950s. He painted up until his death in 1967, with his last piece being Two Comedians. Josephine donated their unified collection of thousands of paintings to several museums before passing away herself 10 months later. Edward's friends and wife described him as an introvert, quiet, tall, and shy, reluctant to attend interviews and award ceremonies, always preferring a reclusive life, and yet, at times he could be humorous. He was stoically serious about his work, however, and described some of his more prominent pieces as symbolic, short, isolated moments of configuration, saturated with suggestion that touch us where we are most vulnerable, and have a suggestion of melancholy, that melancholy being enacted. With that being said, amongst all of Edward Hopper's works, such as Automat, Chop Suey, and Early Sunday Morning, Nighthawks has been recognized as his most illustrious and recognizable piece yet, and for good reason too. Nighthawks, done in 1942, is an oil painting on canvas. It depicts a well-lit diner, possibly of American origin, with a bartender accompanied by 3 patrons on a backdrop of darkened buildings by a street at night. Hopper utilizes perspective to position the main subject, the diner, in such a way as to portray the people inside it from multiple different angles. One with a man's back turned towards the viewer, a near frontal view of another man and woman, and the side view of the bartender. The diner itself also juts into frame, as if cutting through the night with its own light. Hopper also deploys a variety of colors and reflection to create a more realistic lighting. Through contrast, the bright and washed yellow of the diner lights border the surrounding duller tones of dark blue and green of the shadows, street, and diner itself. The lights of the diner also serve to draw the viewer into the scene, inviting them to look through the windows of the eatery. You can tell it's night because of the reflections from the emanating light onto the red buildings and green sidewalks. Anything that the light does not reach is painted much darker, giving off the impression that it is indeed nighttime. Classified as another work of American realism, Nighthawks features saturated tones to set the mood and the use of simplified shapes, yet just enough detail to be recognizable and to seem inhabitable, as if you could walk by the establishment yourself. If you were to give Nighthawks, as well as Hopper's other works, one recurring theme, it would be a sense of solitude and loneliness. Much of his work involves less than 5 people, and all of them exhibit a certain smallness that you can't quite put your finger on. And while they may seem to be interacting with one another, at the same time they seem distant. The characters are always looking away or busy with the small world they're placed in, and it's hard not to feel the slightest bit intrusive as you're peering into their very lives. This point of view is what I believe was Hopper's intention. If you look just a little bit closer at his works, you'll find that our view is situated just outside of the room or area in which the action is taking place, usually done through the use of windows and or openings into the rooms. This approach to perspective, like its peers, captures American lifestyle, but instead portrays another gloomier and much darker side. In the case of Nighthawks, the patrons of the bar look dazed and unfocused, as if there were some looming presence that bothered them. This could be interpreted as the cloud of anxiety, or, in Hopper's own words, predators of the night, lingering after the bombing of Pearl Harbor in 1941, and the prospect of war, as well as a look into the lonely life of a person living in the city during this time. Nighthawks provides us with a metaphorical and literal window into society during the period leading up to World War II. Metaphorically, while we can never truly see what it was like then, this painting succeeds in evoking the same feelings that people like the bar's patrons might likely have felt in such a time of worry and fear. Like many of Hopper's other works, a literal window separates us, the viewer, from the subjects, which also serves as another metaphor to how we can't truly connect and only spectate, left with a sense of serenity and odd calmness that encompasses Hopper's vision, which, in my opinion, is what makes him such a great artist.